GM, how's everybody doing? Welcome to Game Changers. This is the fourth episode of our show where we bring together industry's top visionaries, innovators, and leading brands in space, pushing forward gaming and Web3. I'm your host, Bear, and alongside me, as always, is.
Hey everybody, it's Board. I just want to go ride some chocobos, Bear. I always love your music choices. Good, another banger.
Can you, for the people who don't know in the audience, we'll give them a pass, but why don't you let them know what it is?
What is Final Fantasy or what is a chocobo?
No, what the song is for people who don't know the game or can't
Oh
connect
yeah,
it.
I don't remember which Final Fantasy it was, but a pretty classic series. Really, helped kick off the fandom around Japanese RPGs. They're up to 16 now, so it seems to be pretty popular. And if you've got 100+ hours to burn per game, it's a great game to get into.
Oh my God! I mean, how? I mean, you've been in the games industry for quite a long time. Like, how they have 16. Like, how does this gaming franchise, like measure up against the others, like in terms of like longevity and how long they've been around?
I mean,
Do you
definitely in
know?
the Hall of Fame, they've evolved it from a very simple, just like run around turn based game to now full immersive world. So it's hard to even like capture the entire franchise as one thing. But yeah, I think if you ask somebody like what are the top 10 game franchises in history, Final Fantasy is pretty indisputably going to be in that top 10.
Like, how many games have created 16 versions
I
of
mean,
itself
like
over and stayed alive for like when was the first Final Fantasy? When did that come out? Like was that like late 80s or early
yeah, it
90s?
had to be late 80s, early 90s. I mean, besides sports games that just copy and paste the game, every single year,
Oh yeah, Madden doesn't really count. I'm sorry for all your sports fans.
Boo.
boo earns. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, like there's obviously a lot of Mario games. There's a lot of um, Star Wars games, but yeah, I mean, 16, right? Like, is there actually any other game that actually has the balls, right, to say this is the 16th edition? Usually, they just come up with new names. And these guys are like, no, 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 it's fine. You're OG if you
It's
remember Final Fantasy 3, or if you're a new player, cool. Come join us in 15 or 14.
yeah,
1987 was the first one. Just looked it up.
1987. Wow. She's Louise. All right. Well, we're gonna do. We have a topic today that I think Board and I were I wouldn't say we're sparring, but we were trying to both play the same part in today's show, and that is be the boomer who doesn't know that much about ordinals and gaming. I guess we can both play that role today, though. Is that all right?
We can both do it. I think that's actually important because there's a lot of people, including the two of us, who don't know a ton about it. On my end, I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013, and that was the year I also joined the gaming industry. So I know a lot about both of these things independently, but I do not know about them together. And I think that's what we're here to discuss today.
Yeah, and we've brought up some great people to come join us and help educate and just sort of talk about what's going on. We can go around and do a little bit of introduction, but as always, please, if you're in the audience, please like and follow everybody on stage. Support the people who are who are building. I mean, really, this is I say it every week, but I think our approach to the show is. Not just sort of having one project or one group on to discuss their project, but have multiple people working in a similar space to have legitimate conversations about the pros and the cons, what's working, what's not, people on the front line. So why don't we go around the horn and introduce some people? I'm going to start with my highly decorated partner, one of my two partners, Doda. Welcome to the show, Doda.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Can you say a little bit about yourself for everybody who doesn't know, even though everybody knows who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I am the co-creator of Forgotten Runes, a longtime Bitcoiner. I mined my first Bitcoin in, I guess, 2009, but I wasn't sort of forward-thinking enough to actually keep up with it. So I would say I got more seriously back into it around the same time as Board, it was around 2014. Yeah, so I like to build smart contracts and code um, and I like to build on-chain games. Though I have to admit, I don't know that I know anything more about gaming on ordinals than you guys do. So yeah, it's a pretty new field. Happy to kind of hear from other people as well.
Well, you're gonna be our ordinal expert,
Okay,
and
great.
so you'll play the role in between me and Board on one side, and then people actually building games on ordinals. You'll sit right in between and be the translator. Um, let's go to Psalm next. What's going on, Psalm?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good. You're
Oh,
clear.
nice. Yeah, I haven't done a space in so long. I forgot if my phone still works, but nice.
Well, thank you for making an appearance. Tell us about
Yeah,
yourself.
man. Cool. So yeah, for most of my adult life, I was a professional gamer. I competed in about four different titles across 8 years. Um, those games being Dota 2, Heroes of the Storm, Fortnite, and then lastly Valorant. And then yeah, I competed in Valorant for a couple years, and then kind of fell in love with NFTs and Web3 in general. And then I had the opportunity to join Magic Eden and kind of work in Web3 full time. So I took the opportunity, and here we are.
Well, thanks for joining. And if anyone doesn't know, Magic Eden is, I mean, I would say it's fair that it's like the predominant ordinals marketplace. Would that be correct?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. And lastly, we have another wizard, a different kind of wizard, a taproot wizard, a clean wizard who takes showers. I met you, I don't know, a month or two ago, but we kept seeing each other at all these different conferences, and finally we had a great night. And I'm a big fan of you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me here. How are you? How are you?
I'm doing all right. I had a bit of a rough morning. I biked to work and didn't even have my backpack on my back and didn't realize until I got to the office. So
Yeah.
it's been quite a morning. But thanks for coming and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm an artist. I my work it goes around technology, visual culture. Seems like a very general, but it's very funny that this is the first space ever that I joined that is about games. But my art practice is about games actually. Before doing all these NFTs. So I'm not like I'm not in the gaming industry or like a pro gamer or anything like that. But a lot of us, I guess, we grew up with the video games. Um, so I was doing when I was doing a PhD actually it's on pause, but my PhD was on water on video games, the representation of water on video games. So I really spent like many hours looking at video games. So I'm a freak into of all of these underlying technologies that make games possible. So I thought I was coming to this space to learn about ordinals and games, and now it seems like we are we are the
Well,
ones that need
listen.
to talk about it.
With that, I will go to our other speaker, Jeff. Jeff, it looks like there's a lot of weight on your shoulders because I'm pretty sure you're the only one up here who's actually building games on Ordinal. So you're gonna have to walk us all through. We're gonna have a lot of questions. Jeff, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been in crypto full time since 2000, I believe, 18. I was one of the earliest people in the Stacks ecosystem. I was the head of product at Stacks for several years, and I've been working on this kind of intersection of Bitcoin and other blockchains now for many years. Most of my work has actually been on those kind of problems, those kind of gnarly infrastructure problems, and some DeFi problems in that space. So I'm not a gaming expert at all, actually, but I've been watching ordinals like very intently for a few months, like all of us, and just been thinking a lot about what's missing. So I saw, there's like the name protocol, Sats names. There's BRC20, and I was just like, yeah, this game thing is missing. Like I was sort of like, it's not a question of if, it's a question of who's going to do it and what's it going to look like. And so yeah, I just couldn't get the idea out of my mind, and talked to a few people about it in Miami, and was just like, it's too much like the right idea at the right time to ignore. And so I just like sketched up the protocol and got some feedback on it, and then I launched it, it's called Ord Games. I launched it like 4 days ago, and yeah, Ord Games is a protocol for defining on-chain assets for games. So you can define players and loot. It's kind of it's kind of in the spirit of the original Loot, which is an Ethereum on-chain game framework. So it's like, I think it's the same big idea more or less, but just the different sort of design decisions. And right now I'm kind of in the usual mode of like, you launched a new thing 3 or 4 days ago and you're trying to get people excited about it. You're trying to get people to build on it. You're trying to get infrastructure providers to acknowledge the standard. Like I'm kind of like pulling all those levers in the background, trying to grow this thing. Happy to expand on any of that.
Yeah, Board, I'm not sure if you have any questions. I had one to sort of set the conversation off, unless you have something specific.
I mean, I have a quick one, and why don't you layer on it? But from my perspective, Jeff, I always think about the various chains as almost like their own console, right? Consoles are competing for games, for attention. Sometimes they have a publisher attached to them, and they help bring more games into the ecosystem. I don't know if that's a fair analogy. Do you think about gaming on Bitcoin as a console, or what's your sort of like mental model for it? Hopefully, Bear, that was related to some of your questions.
Yeah, you actually stole my question, so that's okay.
Incredible.
I'm just going to be quiet over here.
Yeah, it might even be like along that same line of thought. It might even be further down, like the sort of extreme, meaning all of the L1 blockchains, they really are their like own little worlds, own little continents. They have their own cultures, distinct people, distinct customs. Everyone is trying to support everyone else, and so it can get very tribal. And so even more so than consoles, I'd say it tends to be extremely kind of self-contained, with I think upsides and downsides. And I would say that just kind of going, kind of like staying on the thread a little bit. Like I think if your primary goal is just to create the most successful game, period, and you kind of are agnostic to technology choices, or at least like open to various technology choices, like you would be with what console to support, then I think like you would do a very different calculus than the one I just did. I think like me and all the folks I work with and all the folks that like kind of like shared investors of the like handful of companies that all have the same. It's like all the early stacks people and all the ordinal people. We've all kind of decided like we are going to hack on Bitcoin and like try to push Bitcoin to its limits, this year, basically. And so I kind of started from that point of view, more so than like, what is the perfect tool? I was like, what is the perfect next thing to launch on Bitcoin? So I would say I'm a little biased, I suppose, in that respect.
That makes sense. And in terms of the big question I imagine you get, that I think is important for you to answer for anyone who's kind of newer to the ecosystem is, Bitcoin does certain things very well. Storing value, of course, is the primary one. But when people ask you like, why branch out into gaming? Why was it important for you to do it? I'm sure it was a personal challenge and you felt like it was a gap, but I'm curious just kind of how you respond to that question when people bring it up.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is very much a side quest for us. Like me and my team, we have a small startup with a small like set of engineers, and like I said, we mostly work on kind of pretty serious infrastructure stuff, like cross-chain stuff. And so this is a bit of a side quest. We're evaluating like, is this thing going to have traction? If so, we'll continue to kind of invest in it in the Ord Games framework and in the infrastructure to support it. That's like one thing, is that it's an experiment, I suppose. Um, yeah, and then I think like in terms of your question was to like why choose Bitcoin and why build the games on Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, what's your sales pitch, I guess, to maybe a budding game developer who's thinking about, the infrastructure behind their game?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like Bitcoin does one thing extremely well, and that's like ownership, whether it's ownership of Bitcoins or ownership of in-game assets. Like it's just this unbreakable ownership layer. It's like once somebody mints one of these in-game assets, there's probably like literally no way on earth to pry it out of their hands. like they own it and they control what's happening with it, and no game company or really, I think, like anybody could ever kind of get it from them. So that's, I think, like the interesting part that's truly new here. So if you're in a Blizzard game universe, for instance, like at the end of the day, they really do control the loot, control the players, control the data. It's really their property, and so you can't like just take your sword or whatever that you minted or that you worked really hard to acquire. Like you can't just like take it out of the game and take it to the next game. And such a it's like just a lot of times, like between Web 2 and Web 3, it's like the things that are impossible on Web 2 become easy on Web 3, and vice versa. Things that we take for granted on Web 2, like performance, for instance, and speed and like capacity, they're like impossible on Web 3. So that's what this is. This is like an inversion. So the take your sword out scenario is actually trivial using ordinals. It's like basically it's just the way it works out of the box. I didn't have to do anything special to get that capability in all the ord games. It's just kind of the way it works. So I think that's the interesting part, is like take your gear out of the game and take it to a new game. And I also think that game designers, this is not isolated to Bitcoin. This is like any on-chain, I think, gaming setup. You can imagine the word that everyone uses in crypto is like composable. So it's like the whole system is very composable, which kind of means like maximum flexibility for a game designer or for a developer. So you could, as a game developer, you could actually like mix and match. You could say like, well, I like the magic items from this game, and I like the definition of like the gaming space, or the land or the arena from this game, and I like the player definition from this game. And nobody gave me permission, but I'm just going to like grab all those assets individually and just suck them into my game. And now I've got a new game that I've again, this word like compose. I've composed it myself, and there's no limits on that. I don't have to go ask for permission. It's just kind of all of the assets are on chain, which means 100% of all assets are available to any game developer at all times, which is a nice property as well. It really favors the tinkerers, the hackers, the people who are like wanting to break things or experiment. It's very experimental, I would say. That's another, I think, very compelling reason to sort of look at this and ask like, oh, what new weird stuff can I build here?
I like that. I wanted to throw it to Sam because I know, Sam, I think you have to leave in a few minutes. You're on the front lines in terms of what Ordinal projects are coming to bear, and lighting up and coming live and minting. Are you seeing any sort of action in this gaming space, or is it still a bit early from your perspective? I know that I really enjoyed our conversation last week because there's very few people who are deep in these marketplaces that are sort of seeing everything.
Yeah, so I'm actually seeing like only like a couple of projects that are kind of showing interest in possibly doing something on the Bitcoin space. So it's not gaining like a ton of traction just from what I'm seeing. And the games that I have been seeing that are looking to do something, they're like either brand new games who are looking to pivot to Bitcoin real quick because it's like the hot narrative. And then I think I've had one where it was like it's like a pre-existing game on another chain that was also looking to kind of take advantage of the hot narrative. So that's what I've been seeing so far. It hasn't been anything like crazy or like a huge shift or anything.
Gotcha. Far, throwing it to you for a second. Obviously, you guys have been really you guys have been pushing the space forward since it came to be. Like, what would you say when you think about gaming and you think about ordinals and sort of the underlying technology? And I know people talk about sort of the slowness of the chain because it wasn't really built necessarily
Mhm.
for for what people are starting to use it for. What do you see? Like I think it'd be easy to talk about the cons, but are there any pros that you sort of see working on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think that for me the most important ones is the for provenance, but also for we were saying before, like Jeff was saying about the composability. It's very interesting, and that's something that I'm currently exploring a lot, doing a lot of things with the recursions, but also like just storing assets, making them available for another, let's say, another client, another game, but they just can pull them out. So I think this is pretty powerful. I don't think there is a reason why there is not like a world where we are multi-chain. I mean, it must be right for now, and and I think in the future, if there is a scaling solution on Bitcoin, that seems like a very interesting, right? To use the layer one as a settlement layer, but then you have a scaling solution for more speed and cheaper, etc., etc. To me, I don't know. I think when I try to do things on Ethereum, I mean, same problem. Like you couldn't put like assets on chain. I mean, you could, but it's less, it's more expensive, and you kind of do like a 3D assets and stuff like that, which is something that I'm doing a lot right now. Uh, so I think this is it's a pretty big deal to me. Now I'm starting to yeah, I'm starting to explore how to build in Unreal and start to fetch from the blockchain and see how that looks. I will know more in a couple of weeks or so. Because I'm going to test it out a lot, but I think it's looking very promising so far.
Question for you guys. In terms of thinking of game design and especially building games on chain, um, a lot of people hold the opinion, and I'm one of them, that certain things need to be on chain in a game and certain things don't. And in fact, if every single interaction is a transaction, that can cause massive problems. So, as you guys are thinking about this from a game design perspective and maybe helping new game designers think about building on Bitcoin, can you talk a little bit about examples like within a game, whatever genre, of certain things that you guys feel would be important to implement blockchain technology, and parts of the game that don't necessarily need to and can pretty much be a centralized, a centrally controlled element of a game.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the Ord games kind of entire, the thinking behind it and the entire design approach is really informed by the answer to the question that you just asked, which is, Bitcoin's so slow and so expensive now that's like, you'd want to push everything off of it you possibly can, for practical reasons. And so, yeah, the only thing really that happens on chain is the ownership stuff. Like you own your player and you own the loot in the game, and all the other, I call it the game client, like all the other actual play mechanics, decisions about the way those assets interact, like all of it is going to be, in some kind of probably centralized implementation. What's interesting about that as well is that there can be like several, so you can have one game universe with one set of loot and players, and many different clients that ingest those assets, and you could play completely different games with them. But yeah, the thinking there is that what a user would be like, it's like a trade-off, like a cost and speed trade-off. What a user would be comfortable with is saying, okay, I'm willing to spend time and money on the establishment of my character and to get valuable loot items, that I would probably be willing to pay for anyway. Like that's the slow stuff, the slow and expensive stuff. And then the actual gameplay, it's like, yeah, you don't want to deal with blockchain speeds at that point, because it's like, why? Um, so that's like that like trade off and like those constraints, directly, like caused me to design it this way. I'm not an expert on like Solana gaming, but I find the opposite compelling as well. Like I do think there's advantages to putting like every single thing on chain. Like I think you do get benefits from that. I kind of am like not super familiar with that. I'm curious if like people are aware of like awesome experiments that have that kind of capability. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I actually, Dota, I wanted to ask you, and not to put you on the spot, but like, I think you understand the limitations technically on Bitcoin block size and what you can upload onto it. I know you have a long history of building games on sort of emerging platforms. If you were to build a game on Bitcoin, I guess it's two part. Like, what do you think are, if you could talk about what are the limitations on building on Bitcoin from like a transaction standpoint, and then given those limitations, what do you think are the opportunities and the types of games or genres to go onto Bitcoin? Does that make
I think,
sense?
yeah, I think that like there's a lot, there's a lot you have to make about where you want to like hook into Bitcoin. So, the stacks, for example, has been around for a long time. So I think they would argue with this characterization, but the best way stacks would be something like an L2, right? So it's this like almost like another chain uh, that has like a bit better performance capabilities on par of what we might expect with Ethereum. Um, and presumably, that's not really what most people are excited about when they talk about building on Bitcoin, right? It's kind of considered that ordinals are a bit closer to Bitcoin than stacks, right? So, because of ordinals, you're basically storing uh, text with kind of within the transactions themselves. I think we can get into a debate about semantics about what's an L2 and what's not, but I think one of the things you're seeing is a lot of people building on effectively ordinals, right? This idea that Taproot allows you to store an arbitrary amount of text within the sort of L1 Bitcoin transaction, and now you can kind of put whatever data you want in that. And so, really, like one of the earliest economic games that we're seeing is like BRC20s. Like you can really think of tokens themselves as a game, and people are basically looking for ways to say, okay, well, how can we deal with like adding liquidity to these? And I think that like when you think about like building games on Bitcoin, that's one of the first things you have to kind of establish is this idea that you're able to like trade them, and we've got that with like marketplaces like Magic Eden and new transaction types. Um, but I think that like so immediately once you have that, you're like, okay, I created an asset, I can trade it. What now? What right? And what you find with a lot of the ordinals experiments, what people are actually doing is creating their own what they call indexers. And this indexers would actually be like off-chain code that everybody who wants to participate runs that sort of reads the transactions on chain and then interprets them in a way that's sort of like socially agreed upon. And so again, it's so funny because like you could almost think of like the ordinal indexer as like a sort of L2, but I don't really want to go there. The But when I imagine about building a game on Bitcoin, I essentially see that you're going to use Bitcoin as the database and you're going to use your indexer as your sort of like rules enforcer. And I think that's really the phase that you see ordinals in now. You've seen people try to say, oh, we're going to put the EVM on top of Bitcoin. And, well, that has the same problems that ordinals had in the first place, which is Bitcoiners don't want the EVM. EVM people don't want the slowness of Bitcoin. It's an interesting idea, but it's probably a bit heavy-handed given the degree of flexibility that you have when writing your own indexer. So I don't know. I think if I squint, that's really where I see games starting to build is like, okay, what's the gaming indexer look like? And what can you do? And what are the rules? And how do we agree upon those rules?
Is another analogy from the real world that basically like you've built Mario. Mario is on Bitcoin. He has certain properties, how high he can jump, what he looks like, what types of functions he has, and that the game that Mario plays in is completely centralized and up to the game developer. And essentially, if you're creating all these assets, whether it's a character or a box or a sword, it's really up to any game out there to absorb that asset. Um, is that a fair assessment? So, like my previous analogy of like, chains or consoles would not be true. It's really that chains are these indexes of things, and these things can basically exist inside of any game who would like to embrace them.
Yeah, that's about right, I would say.
Okay, slightly less boomer. Bear, we're learning, getting smart.
You're winning. Dota, you have something to say?
Yeah, I basically
Oh,
don't
he was.
like get that excited about the interoperability, like portability story very much in terms of because how to say this? Because it's very hard to balance assets across many games, right? So like let's say I make a game and you make a game, and I make a game that and I issue a new sword that has like 100 strength or something, and then you make a game where you now use that sword. Well, now actually balancing your game is subject to like my inflation requirements, and so there like actually the effects of how I build my game can actually throw your game off balance. I feel like great games are always like like stacking stones in the river, and really any sort of wind can kind of knock over the balance. So I think that like interoperability actually works best in favor of um, well, basically mutiny or vampire attacks. You see this with, for example, like DeFi projects on Ethereum, where if I want to kind of start a new project, I can basically convince all of the liquidity to come over to my project by like bribing them with some sort of incentive. And I see that like game asset portability is actually quite valuable for up and comers, right? If I want to make a new game and I want to vampire attack all your users, then I'll basically tell your users, hey, yeah, all that like armor that you spent so much time grinding for, I'll actually let you have that here at a particular snapshot. And so there's this funny thing where I think it's like if you have a good moat, if you have a monopoly on your game, I don't actually see why you would be incentivized to like encourage interoperable assets, because all you're doing is opening yourself up for like an up and comer to come and vampire attack your players away.
I think one place it could work is if it's purely aesthetic. If you think about a game like Smash Brothers, they have to bring in characters from all these games and agree to, sort of the licensing terms of my character needs to look this certain way, make these certain sounds, wear this clothing. But in terms of the actual gameplay, how they fight, Mr. Sakurai has to make sure that the game is balanced and that he's not getting dictated by Konami or Square Enix about like how their players are going to fight, because that would just destroy the fun of the game. So maybe in that sense, and in Dota, I definitely agree with your take, but I think if it's just like purely aesthetic, that could be an opportunity for interoperability, which people really get a kick out of, like having characters jump from one game to another, but not at the expense of the game's design.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, I would say even the term vampire attack is the sort of frame of reference for that terminology is from like a project developer, like a DeFi project developer. To the users, it's not a vampire attack. To the users, it's like awesome new companies are giving me free shit or whatever, right? That's like their experience of it. And so, but if you zoom out, this is just kind of more standard issue Web3 stuff, which is you could call the game developer like the intermediary in this case, or the rent seeker. It's like kind of kicking them out of the equation, right? The value accrues more directly to the holder base. In the DeFi example, to the people who hold the tokens. In the game example, to the people who hold the game assets. And I'm not saying that's all just a panacea and that everything gets better there, because I think that creates new problems. And so I think going back to what Dota said, like we've yet to have a live example where this interoperability thing actually does turn into a panacea. Like it's in theory fantastic. We've yet to see like, I don't know, beautiful, successful, amazing game then its successor game or its child game or whatever you want to call it, like absorb the assets. And in both cases, the game developers are thrilled and the users are thrilled. Like I would agree that is kind of a it's
Yeah,
like kind of a
because like
hand wavy nice idea at this point.
because every asset that I want to include in my game like takes work for me, and so like I can understand, you could do cosmetic because you basically want to get that community, right? I'm going to create ape sprites so that way the ape community feels at home when they come into my game. But to me, I see that as a marketing expense for a growth hack. Like for if I'm going to like create armor and support armor in my game, like why would I use the armor that somebody else invented? I would just make my own and then charge my users for it. And so I think that like a lot of the time there's these like very fundamental incentive problems that like assets are how the person who makes the game makes money. And so like why should you ever use anyone else's assets when you could just make your own and charge for them?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like the sort of market has yet to sort this out. Like there's been several folks like me basically saying it's a cool idea and let's like give it a shot. But I would say we've yet to see the success story for that. That's true.
Yeah, well, I think like loot, like I love loot. Though, don't get me wrong, right? Like I think it's incredible to have some. Um, I love the dream of it, and so I think that that's just one of the things that everyone's like just trying to struggle with, which is like, how do we make how do we make loot real? Like, how do we make loot significant and a game that's fun that everyone loves to play? I don't know the answer.
I had something to throw out. I don't know who would want to respond to it, or if anyone would want to respond to it. But I know I know that like when people started building games on ETH, it was like a reset, right? So it felt like it was the '80s all over again in terms of gaming development. It went back to basics, a lot of pixel stuff, and sort of simple mechanics. Like do we see the same thing happening in Bitcoin? Like, is there, like, what is the copy pasta game from the '80s that you can even put on Bitcoin? Like, Board, you had mentioned, okay, like you take Super Mario Brothers. Like, what are the limitations? Like, I don't even know. Is it like 4 megabytes? 4 megabytes is the limit size.
I think that like the board's analogy of different chains being different consoles is true in a very deep way. And that like when you look at NES, you were like wired and it was wired into the TV. And the TV was like a CRT. And so even like the pixels on the CRT were like they were more like portrait than square. And so the artwork that you see in the NES, the designers actually the pixel art was compensating for the fact that the pixels weren't square, right? And then you fast forward to like the Wii, for example, right? When you play the Wii, now you're wireless and you've got this like 3D engine and you've got gyroscopes, and so you can kind of like flick your wrist and interpret that as like a movement, right? And so that changes the games that are possible. And so I look at something like Bitcoin. Well, what Bitcoin is best at is being this database for essentially like high value transactions, right? It's not good like the Wii where you flick your wrist and now we record the gyroscope and respond to it, but it is very good at sort of like storing, millions of dollars of value if you don't mind waiting 10 minutes to figure out if your transaction was confirmed or not. And so that's where I see like that the most kind of interesting games start to emerge is when you say, well, like this is Bitcoin, and so what are the things Bitcoin is good at, and what are the transactions we can store here that are like very valuable, and the decentralized consensus mechanics that we can enforce that we couldn't enforce any other way.
I think this might be the first time in history that cathode ray tube televisions were mentioned on a space. So Dota, congratulations.
I miss those. What were they? RCA cables, like the red, white, and yellow.
That's right. I
Oh,
just I just bought a. I think I was telling you I bought a refurbished NES, and so my gun from the Duck Hunt game does not work on an LED TV. You have to have a CRT television to actually use it.
Yeah.
Good
so you're
good
gonna get
times.
one of those TVs?
I don't know, man. They're so heavy and they're actually hard to get now. We'll see. We'll see. But I always appreciate these analogies because I think that, regardless of the chain, whether it's being built on Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else, like getting for me at least, getting players onboarded, getting them excited, getting them interested, getting them to not explicitly hate this idea that we're kind of working on here is really important. So that's why I keep going back to these kind of traditional gaming analogies, just to help people understand, because it's like we're all in the weeds and we understand a lot of this terminology, but I think the biggest question is just answering why make this transition, why add this industry or this vertical to what already exists in gaming. And so I think you always got to bring it back to what people know and expand on their patterns.
I was in a space like related to this question. I was in a space yesterday, and I heard one or two people kind of explain it, and I thought they really like hit the right point, which was, um, yeah, I think that like most people here are like excited about kind of Web 2 games or like the previous era gaming, and the Web 3 folks kind of have envy of that, and they start to think like, okay, I'm going to build like a AAA amazing game, and like it's going to have some crypto stuff in it. And that's, you probably already are off track at that point. Like I would sort of suggest going back to basics, rethinking the entire thing from scratch in terms of just like what the strengths of doing stuff on blockchain are. And they tend to look very different. Like even Axie, you could kind of say, well, it was really like a DeFi gambling engine or something, and then it like happened to have some game stuff kind of strapped onto the side. I mean, that's kind of, I think, accurate. Or like same thing with even like crypto kitties, right? It's like, well, they're like, it's cute and you can breed them and da da da. And it's like, well, it's kind of a DeFi thing with like a game wrapper on top. And I do think that I would just kind of start there. Like it's much this is like the interesting game ideas, and the ones that I think will actually work are ones that kind of have, they kind of look more like gambling mechanics, and they tend to look more like interesting game theory exercises. Again, going back to what Dota said about if you have the capability to very easily and completely securely move around millions of dollars of value, okay, it's like, okay, now add a gaming kind of layer on top of that. Like, what can you do? I think those are the things that are. I'm not saying that's the ultimate goal. I'm saying that's what will kind of have kind of product market technology fit in the near future.